go back to Catholic Christendom, then you've got a vast swathe of nations which are all being taught in the way I've described.
Yeah.
The Reformation, whatever one thinks of it, it's disruptive. Certainly disruptive. But when you move into the post-English Civil War period, you've got in the 18th century a major rejection of religion amongst the intellectual classes of England, particularly because they've seen what religion has done, brought terrible civil war. And so we see, from the 18th century onwards, the masses begin to lose their faith. They're no longer having over them an intellectual elite which propounds the faith that existed prior to the Protestant Reformation. So eventually it filters down to the masses completely. In the 19th century, you've got people who are no longer believing at all of the masses because the further disruption with the factory system. People flooding from the countryside where they had their Anglican parson into the cities and towns where there's just no religion at all, and they fall prey to the new ideas like socialism. And then you get into the 20th century when you get consumer society developing, and people then, of course, no longer feel they need religion. They're distracted completely by the fancy goods that are available. So you're right, it's all become a mess. And that's one of the things we can say about God in his providence. He's given literacy and printed Bibles so that now people in a sea of blasphemy and ignorance can go home with their own Bible, which was never possible in the Middle Ages, and read God's word for themselves. So that's a great benefit which they never had in the past until printing came along. And not just printing, but printing so profusely that the books were cheap enough that you could read one yourself, and along with literacy. But there's a risk of the faith not being understood fully if you can't read and write and you don't have access to a Bible. Because although I was painting a great picture of Catholic Christendom, the deficiency is if you can't read and write, you haven't got the great opportunity to read the New Testament for yourself. And that, no matter what one thinks about the priests and how crafty they might have been in misleading people about what was in the Bible, I don't believe all that. But what I do believe is that if you can't read and write, you can't appreciate fully what Christian doctrine is and what Jesus is saying, because the richness of it has to be read. But the downside of just having a Bible of your own, is that you can misunderstand things. And Protestant people, surely they know that the great differences in the Protestant groups have arisen because they no longer accept church authority, but they say the Bible is my authority, and then they create a church based on that authority. If they just stayed as individuals, not creating churches of their own, it might not be so bad. It'd still be very confused. But when they create new churches based on their understanding of the Bible, then you get structures which perpetuate error down the centuries. So,